The reason you're not getting better, even though you work hard at healing from past trauma, might just be because you keep talking about it, your story. And I know you're not supposed to say that because, going and talking to somebody, it's like the standard thing that you're supposed to do about any kind of emotional struggle. And definitely what's recommended is talking about it if you grew up abused or neglected and it's causing you problems as an adult. Now, every time I say this, I get a few angry letters, and then I get a whole bunch of thank you letters, because that's what I'm saying. You might consider not talking so much about your trauma. I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, and I teach people the radical idea that if you're struggling with PTSD from childhood and conventional approaches to treatment, including talk therapy, aren't helping you, you might want to try not talking so much about what happened to you, and instead write about it. And in this video, I'm going to give you a little background on that and then tell you some surprising reasons why you might want to consciously talk less about trauma and instead write more. Now, I'm personally someone who gets completely dysregulated when I talk openly about trauma from my past. My heart pounds, my face gets numb, I get clumsy and discombobulated, and it's not that I've never talked about it. I've struggled through the telling of this story many, many times. And maybe you've kept your story secret, but if you're like most people, you've told it. You've told it again and again and again. Telling someone what happened is an important process, and it's usually essential to healing, really, but talking and talking and talking about the past in therapists' offices, back when I used to do that, was not only not helping me, it was putting me in a worse state when I left that appointment than when I had walked in. And a lot of you had told me the same thing happened to you. Whatever you might have gained from therapy couldn't even happen because you'd go into such a stressed state inside that you couldn't really process what was being discussed or make any plans to do something or have an insight about how to make life better, right? It just becomes that talking like a vortex sucking you down. Now, in my case, I'd gotten past the point where I couldn't keep going with that anymore, which is frightening because at the time anyway, I didn't know any alternatives to talking to a therapist. That's just what you're supposed to do, right? And then one day, I was able to stop because I found a completely different approach to healing that was not based on talking, but based on writing. Now, this was a technique I could use myself, and I could do it anywhere I wanted or wherever I happened to be. And I learned it just in a very short amount of time from this woman I was acquainted with. And then from time to time, she would allow me to call her and read what I had written, and she would give me some help with that. But other than that, this was totally self-directed, self-contained, and best of all, free. Now, if you're someone who can't talk about this stuff without getting triggered, you're probably like me and you still crave, you need someone to hear you, to understand. And you can have that by reading what you wrote. You write it and you read it, and for reasons of the way our brain is wired, you can bypass that trigger that sets off the dysregulation when you talk about past trauma. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% true for everybody, but it's documented. It's true for me. It's true for a lot of the people in my community. And the only way you're going to find out if it's easier for you to write it and read it is to try it. So yeah, if you're interested, you can learn it for free from a course that I created. I always put a link to it below my videos in the description section. So you can pop down there and find that if you want when you're done watching the video, or right now if you want. But when I started to regularly write about the memories and thoughts that were putting me in distress, and I do this twice a day, writing fears and resentments using this special technique. When I started doing that regularly, it was a very short time before I popped out of that stuck place, which was essentially a very bad depression, but it was like locked in with CPTSD, right? It had held me back for years, and now I know why. And what I experienced after I was writing regularly, I felt happier, less angry, more focused, more excited about my life, less consumed with how I was feeling all the time. Just like overall way better than I had been in therapy. And at this time, I was in therapy 3 times a week. So this is after trying many, many therapists. She was really good, but it's just that talking about trauma was continually putting me back into the cycle of PTSD. Now, The research didn't make a big splash at the time, but back in the 80s, a researcher from the University of Texas in Austin named James Pennebaker found out that people who wrote about past trauma, even a little bit, I think they did it 4 times for 15 minutes a sitting over 4 days, and it showed a big measurable change in their use of healthcare in the following months. And since this was like a student population, they could tell who came in for healthcare. And the people who had been writing used healthcare 50% less. They were seeking care 50% less often than the general population at school. And what this suggested, and the study was replicated in a whole lot of other places, was that there was a positive health benefit to writing about trauma. Well, now we know that writing uses that different part of the brain than talking, and where talking about a terrible thing that happened can re-trigger a trauma response, getting your whole endocrine system going and adrenals and heart's pounding. Writing can allow you to express what happened without re-triggering all that. And as you may know from experience, when you have active PTSD, that constant triggering and re-triggering is exhausting. It's hard on your emotions, it's hard on your body, it wears you down, and it can keep you trapped in your trauma. Now again, it's important to talk about it sometimes, and if that's what's helping you, by all means, you should keep talking about trauma with a therapist. But if you're finding that you keep getting stuck when you're telling your story, that it's bringing you down, you're not progressing, you might want to try writing. Now, in my opinion, some forms of writing are more helpful than others. Some people write long lists of bad things that were done to them and things that they hate about people, for example. And actually, if we go by Pennebaker's research, that probably is helpful. But for me, just listing the bad thoughts tends to kind of bring me down. I think it's something like the written equivalent of ranting. So it may bypass the trigger, but it still remains very negative. The technique I teach has a lighter touch than that. You get to write it down, but it's all oriented toward releasing it. Now, you might be afraid that releasing your fears and resentments would just leave you defenseless, like whatever happens, happens, but it's on the contrary. Fear of immediate danger is healthy and not the same thing as the fears that I'm suggesting you try writing. I'm talking about the hamster wheel fears and resentments, the ruminating and whirling and repetition fears and resentments that go around in your head and keep you awake at night, keep you agitated and pulling away from life. This kind of fear and resentment doesn't keep you safe in any way. It doesn't make you logical. More often, it clouds your judgment. And in fact, when you need to protect yourself or set a boundary or act courageously, you get bogged down in confusion and doubt. So that can be cleared up, and then you can feel more clear and more aware of what's going on around you, less distracted by anxious thoughts, and more able to pounce or fight or say hello or even decide not to say anything. You have choices in front of you. And that can be the most powerful thing of all, is just to decide how you want to respond to any situation that you're in. Now, in terms of your relationships with other people, having this healthy, self-contained way to process your negative feelings can make a huge difference in what happens when you have conflict. For one thing, you're no longer leaking fear and resentment all over the other person, either with prickly anger or anxiousness that comes off like neediness. And with less fear and resentment, you're less likely to explode when feelings get intense. You can learn to interact with other people without leading with the story of what happened to you, because this is common with a lot of traumatized people. We get so identified with the trauma that it's like the second or third thing that we tell people about ourselves. And this is alienating to other people, well, definitely to healthy people. Leading with your trauma, like putting that out there as a frontline thing about your identity, it's one reason that you might have found your life populated with a lot of other traumatized people, and worse, people who are truly unavailable and screwed up and could be very hurtful to you. So when you have a healthy way to process the past, you get to be here now. You get to pay attention. You get to enjoy your life. And instead of being a victim or a survivor, you just get to be you. You get to be defined by who you are and not what other people did to you. Now, I know with me, I sometimes got hesitant to stop identifying with past trauma because, feeling damaged was like my safe place, where I had protection against anyone expecting very much of me. Like, don't look at me, I had a rough childhood, I can't be expected to bring a very big thing to the potluck, that kind of thing. And I found friends who were on board with that because they were doing it too. And as I grew and healed, that began to feel uncomfortable for them. And it often made them feel judged, even though that's not what I was doing. Okay, sometimes I was judging them, right? But there comes a time when it doesn't feel good to try to make everyone see you as a damaged person who they have to make an exception for. And I grew to feel that I wanted to be seen as a good-hearted and capable person who could be trusted. And soon that is how I was seen. It feels better to be true to yourself more than true to your story. And to be able to turn your attention outward to the world, to the people and the adventures that lie ahead of you. Now, if you like this topic, I'm going to point you to this video right here that talks more about the freedom to be yourself that comes with healing. And I will see you very soon.